The morning was quiet, but something felt wrong. Sandra noticed it the moment she stepped onto the set. The crew moved softly, whispering instead of talking. Usually, Keanu greeted everyone with a small smile and a calm, "Good morning." But today he stood near the window, silent, distant, his face pale against the soft glow of daylight. She walked closer. "Hey," she said gently, "you okay?" Keanu turned to her, opened his mouth, then stopped. No sound came out. He tried again, but his lips only moved without a voice. Sandra froze, her heart beating faster. His eyes, usually steady and full of quiet strength, now looked frightened, not for himself, but for what his silence might mean. The director hurried over. "He can't talk," he whispered to Sandra. "It started this morning. His doctor's on the way." The next few hours passed in slow motion. Keanu sat on a chair, motionless, communicating only with glances. Everyone around him felt the strange stillness, like the world had lowered its volume out of respect. Sandra sat beside him, not saying much. She didn't need to. She just stayed close, making sure he wasn't alone in that strange silence. By afternoon, the doctor arrived. He checked Keanu carefully and spoke softly as if afraid to break something fragile. "It's temporary," he said. "His vocal cords are strained, probably from overwork or stress. He'll recover, but he must not speak for at least 2 weeks." Keanu nodded slowly. His eyes met Sandra's again. They said more than words could. "Don't worry," her smile said without sound. "I'll make sure they understand you." That night, the set was empty. Sandra stayed behind, sitting on the wooden bench outside the studio. Keanu joined her quietly, holding 2 cups of tea. He offered one to her with a small smile. She took it and whispered, "Thank you." He wrote something on his phone and showed it to her. "You don't have to stay." "I'm fine." She looked at him. "You're not fine. You just don't want people to worry." He smiled again, soft but tired. He typed another line. "I'm used to silence, but I forgot how heavy it can feel when you can't say the things that matter." She read it twice. Her throat tightened. "Then don't let silence win," she whispered. "You still have your eyes. They can say more than voices ever could." He looked at her deeply this time, as if her words had touched a place he'd been protecting for years. The next few days changed everything. Keanu came to set every morning, silent but present. He acted using only expressions, gestures, and pauses. His silence began to carry power. People noticed details they'd never seen before. The small lift of his eyebrow, the quiet sadness in his smile, the way his eyes softened when he looked at Sandra. And Sandra. She started understanding him without needing words. If he needed a break, she knew it before he did. If something bothered him, she saw it in the way his hand slightly trembled. One evening, after a long day of filming, Sandra found him sitting alone under a dim studio light. He was sketching something, a small drawing of 2 people sitting beside each other facing the sunset. "That's us, isn't it?" she said softly. He nodded. Then he wrote beneath the drawing, "Some words don't need voices. They just need eyes that listen." Her heart melted. She smiled and whispered, "Then I'll keep listening." But deep inside, she knew this silence wasn't just about losing his voice. There was something else, something Keanu hadn't told anyone. She saw it in his eyes, a quiet pain, a secret waiting behind the calm, and she was right. That secret was about to change everything. When silence began to speak louder, the next morning, Sandra arrived early. She found Keanu already there, standing by the same window, watching the quiet rain slide down the glass. His silence had become a kind of rhythm, peaceful yet full of unspoken weight. He turned and smiled when he saw her, the kind of smile that didn't reach the lips but spoke softly through the eyes. She smiled back. "You're early again," she whispered. He nodded, then handed her a small note. It said couldn't sleep. Too many thoughts. But rain helps. She read it and smiled faintly. "Rain always listens," she said, "and never interrupts." For a moment, they just stood there together, listening to the faint sound of droplets tapping the window. It felt like the world outside was washing away something, maybe fear, maybe loneliness. As the day began, filming resumed. The director decided to change parts of the script, so Keanu's silence became part of the character. It was risky, but somehow everyone agreed. It fit too perfectly to ignore. And when the camera started rolling, something magical happened. Keanu didn't need words. He acted with his eyes, his gestures, his stillness. The entire crew stood silently after every take, unsure whether to clap or just breathe. But behind that quiet brilliance, Sandra saw something breaking. Every time she looked at him between takes, his expression softened with gratitude, but his eyes hid something deeper, a sadness that refused to fade. It wasn't just exhaustion, it was memory. That evening, when everyone left, Sandra stayed again. She found him outside, sitting on the edge of the wooden railing, his phone in his hand. His thumbs hovered over the screen, typing and deleting, typing again, deleting again. She walked closer. "What are you trying to say?" He handed her the phone. It read, "I keep hearing her voice when I close my eyes. My sister. She used to say that silence is where love hides when words get tired. I didn't understand then. Now I do." Her eyes softened. "You never told me about her," he typed again. "She passed away years ago. She couldn't speak at the end either." She just smiled. "I guess now it's my turn to understand what she felt." Sandra sat beside him quietly. The night breeze moved through the trees, carrying their silence like a secret. After a long pause, she said softly, "You know, you don't have to understand everything right now. Sometimes silence isn't a punishment. It's just a pause before the truth finds its way back." He looked at her with that same quiet intensity that made people forget to breathe. Then, slowly, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded paper. It was old, the edges worn. He opened it and handed it to her. Inside was a short note, written in soft handwriting. "If one day you lose your voice, let your kindness speak for you." "People will still hear you?" She wrote that, Sandra asked. He nodded. She touched the paper gently. "Then maybe she's still speaking through you." He looked away for a moment, blinking hard. Then, almost as if responding to her words, a faint smile returned to his lips. Over the next few days, Sandra became his voice. She read his thoughts, guessed his jokes, and sometimes spoke for him before he even finished typing. Their chemistry became natural, real, like it had always been there waiting for silence to bring it out. One afternoon, during a break, Sandra was sitting alone on a bench outside the studio when a reporter approached her. "Miss Bullock," he said carefully, "there are rumors about Keanu's health. Is it true he's lost his voice permanently?" She hesitated, then smiled calmly. "No, he hasn't lost his voice. He's just teaching all of us how to listen differently." Her answer went viral. Fans everywhere started calling Keanu's silence the voice of peace. Memes, articles, and interviews spread across the internet. But Keanu didn't react. He didn't seem proud. He seemed humbled. That night, Sandra found him staring at his sister's note again. She sat beside him and said softly, "The world's listening now, and you didn't even have to say a word." He wrote one line on his phone and showed it to her. "But the only person I really wanted to hear me already can." She frowned slightly. "Who?" He looked straight into her eyes and she realized he wasn't talking about the world. He was talking about her. For the first time, Sandra couldn't find words. She just looked back, her chest tight, her eyes wet. Neither of them spoke. They didn't have to, because in that quiet space between two heartbeats, his eyes said everything. The letter he never sent, the next few days, moved like slow rain. Everyone on set could feel the strange tenderness between Keanu and Sandra. They never talked about it, never called it anything, but it was there, a quiet rhythm that followed them everywhere. Sometimes when she laughed softly, he would look at her for just a moment too long. Sometimes when he smiled, she felt her heart catch like it had remembered something it was never supposed to forget. But beneath that calm, something inside him was beginning to stir. It wasn't peace. It was guilt. One afternoon, when filming ended early, Sandra saw Keanu sitting in the corner of the empty stage. A piece of paper was on his lap, his pen still in his hand, but he wasn't writing anymore. He was just staring at it, as if the words had stopped halfway. She walked toward him slowly. "Writing again?" she asked gently. He nodded, not looking up. She sat beside him and waited. When he finally handed her the paper, her breath caught. It was a letter, written but never sent. Dear Maya, I hope you can still see me. I lost my voice just like you did. I thought silence would be peaceful, but it hurts more than I imagined. I understand now what you meant when you said love isn't about words. I wish I could tell you that I'm trying to make it right, trying to live the way you wanted me to. I met someone. She reminds me of you in some ways, kind, patient, strong. Maybe that's why being around her hurts and heals at the same time. The letter stopped there. No signature, no ending. Just a quiet space, as if even his hand couldn't finish what his heart was trying to say. Sandra folded the letter slowly. She sounds like she was special. He took back the paper, nodded, and wrote on his phone, "She was my sister and my best friend. She believed people don't die when they stop breathing. They die when they stop being understood." Sandra whispered, "And she still understands you?" His eyes glistened. For a moment, he turned away. Then he typed again. "I don't know if I can ever talk again. Maybe it's not just my voice. Maybe something inside me forgot how." She placed her hand on his gently. "Then I'll help you remember, even if it takes a lifetime." He looked at her hand, resting over his, then up into her eyes. There was something fragile in that silence, something that almost broke her heart. That evening, the studio lights dimmed early. Sandra stayed behind again. She found Keanu at the piano in the corner of the soundstage. He wasn't playing, just tracing the keys softly, like remembering a song from long ago. She sat beside him. "Do you play?" He shook his head, then wrote, "She used to. I just remember the way she smiled when she played this one melody." Then, slowly, his fingers pressed the keys, hesitant at first, then steady. The soft sound filled the air, trembling and real. Sandra closed her eyes. It was simple but full of emotion, like a voice that didn't need a mouth to speak. When he stopped, Sandra whispered, "That's beautiful." He smiled faintly and typed, "That was the last thing she played before she left. I used to hate that melody. Now it feels like she's speaking through it." A tear slipped down Sandra's cheek. She brushed it away quickly. "Then keep playing. Maybe she's listening." He played again, softer, slower this time. And for a moment she could swear she saw peace cross his face. Afterward, when they stepped outside, the night air was cool and quiet. Sandra looked at him and said softly, "If she could see you now, she'd be proud?" He typed slowly, "You sound sure of that." "I am," she said, "because when you stopped speaking, you started teaching people what real strength looks like." He looked at her again, eyes shimmering under the moonlight. For a second, it felt like he wanted to say something big, something true. But no sound came out. Just a long, deep breath. Then, out of nowhere, he took her phone from her hand and typed a message into his own, showing it to her. "I wrote something for you too, but I haven't shown it yet. Maybe one day?" She smiled gently. "You just did." That night, when she got home, she couldn't sleep. His eyes kept returning to her mind, the quiet sadness in them, the honesty, the trust. And for the first time, she realized she wasn't just helping him heal. She was beginning to need him, too. And somewhere across the city, Keanu sat by his window, finishing his letter to Maya. This time, he added one last line before folding it. "If you can hear me, Maya, I think I finally found the person who can read me, even when I can't speak." The silence that broke first, the days passed quietly, like pages turning in a slow, fragile book. Keanu's voice still hadn't returned, but something else had changed. The crew noticed it first, how he smiled more now, how he seemed lighter, almost as if Sandra's presence had become his new language. Wherever she was, his eyes followed softly, not with longing, but with comfort, like she was the only thing that didn't make silence feel heavy. One morning, Sandra arrived on set to find him sitting alone in the makeup room. Sunlight poured through the blinds, brushing his face in soft gold. He was staring at the mirror, a faint frown between his eyebrows. On the counter in front of him lay a small card. She stepped closer. "What's that?" He handed it to her. It was a medical appointment reminder, a specialist visit. She looked up and he nodded slowly. "You think it's bad news?" she whispered. He wrote, "Maybe. Maybe not. But I need to know." She smiled gently. "Then I'll go with you." He started to shake his head, but she stopped him. "No arguments. It's settled." Later that afternoon, they drove together to the clinic. The road was quiet, lined with trees shedding soft yellow leaves. Sandra kept the radio low. Soft music, slow piano, the kind that didn't demand attention. She glanced at him a few times, his face calm, eyes lost in thought. "You're not scared, are you?" she asked finally. He typed, "I've been scared before. This feels different. Maybe I just don't want to disappoint people if it never comes back." She looked at him, her heart twisting. "Keanu," she said quietly, "your voice isn't what makes people listen to you. It's your truth. That doesn't need sound." He turned toward her with a small, grateful smile. She could see something in his eyes, that rare kind of respect that makes words unnecessary. At the clinic, the doctor examined him carefully, then asked him to rest his vocal cords longer. He explained that the strain was deeper than expected, emotional as much as physical. "He'll speak again," the doctor said softly, "but only when his heart feels ready, not his throat." The words stayed with Sandra the whole drive back. She kept glancing at him. How quiet he was. How he stared out the window as if searching for something far away. That night, she found him sitting near the lake behind the studio. The water shimmered under the silver moonlight, and the world seemed to be holding its breath. She sat beside him. "You heard what the doctor said?" He nodded. "You'll talk again," she continued. "When it's time." He looked down at his reflection in the water, then wrote on his phone, "What if I don't want to? What if I like the quiet too much now?" She frowned. "You think silence is safer?" He nodded again. "When I talk, I ruin things. Silence feels kinder." Her heart hurt at that. "You haven't ruined anything, Keanu. You've only made people see you more clearly." He didn't respond. Instead, he stood up slowly and began to walk toward the small wooden bridge nearby. Sandra followed, her footsteps soft behind him. At the middle of the bridge, he stopped. She watched as he looked up at the stars, eyes glimmering. After a long pause, he took a deep breath, as if fighting something inside him. And then, softly, so softly she almost didn't believe it, she heard him whisper, "Thank you." It was faint, cracked, like a voice waking after a long sleep. Sandra froze. Her eyes widened, tears instantly blurring her vision. He looked at her, a little shocked himself. His hand went to his throat as if he couldn't believe the sound had actually come out. She covered her mouth, trembling. "Say it again," she whispered. He tried. This time it came out clearer, fragile but real. "Thank you." Her tears fell freely now. She stepped closer and took his hand. "Don't push. Just breathe." "It's okay," he smiled. Not because he had found his voice, but because she had been there to hear it first. For a long moment, they stood together on that bridge, two quiet souls beneath a quiet sky, with only the sound of the wind and a voice that had just returned from silence. After a while, she whispered, "You did it." He shook his head slowly and wrote on his phone, "No, we did. Your patience gave my silence a reason to end." She smiled through her tears. "Then promise me something. No matter what happens next, don't go silent again. Not from pain, not from fear." He looked into her eyes, nodded once, and whispered, "I promise." That word echoed softly over the lake, small and beautiful, like a prayer finding its way home. Later, as they walked back toward the studio, Sandra thought about everything they had gone through. The silence, the letters, the eyes that spoke louder than words, and now, finally, a voice. But somewhere deep inside, she knew this wasn't the end of the story. Because sometimes when one silence ends, another begins, one that hides something even deeper, and Keanu still hadn't told her the whole truth. The secret that waited in silence. The next morning, Sandra woke up before sunrise. Something about last night's moment, hearing his voice again, had stayed inside her like a soft light that refused to fade. She smiled quietly to herself, remembering how fragile and beautiful that sound was, like a promise whispered between two hearts that had already begun to understand each other without trying. But as the day moved forward, she began to notice something strange. Keanu wasn't at the studio. His chair was empty. His phone wasn't answering. By noon, even the director looked uneasy. "He texted me last night," Sandra said softly. "Just one line, 'Thank you for helping me speak again.'" The director sighed. Maybe he needed rest. He's been carrying a lot. But Sandra's heart didn't rest. Something felt off. She could sense it. That same stillness she'd seen in his eyes before he broke his silence. Later that afternoon, she drove to his house. The sky was pale gray, the kind of color that made everything feel slower. When she knocked, there was no answer. She tried again. Finally, the door opened just slightly, and Keanu stood there, his face calm but distant, like someone lost between peace and sorrow. "You weren't at the set," she said softly. "I got worried," he nodded. "I needed time," he whispered. His voice was still gentle, but weaker than before. "Are you okay?" He looked away. "I don't know," he said, the words shaky but clear. She stepped inside. The house was quiet, too quiet. A piano sat by the window, the same melody from before still written on a sheet beside it. On the table, she noticed something. A small wooden box, half open, filled with letters, photos, and a small silver pendant. She touched the pendant carefully. "Is this hers?" He nodded. "Maya's," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "I used to wear it when I needed strength. But lately, it feels heavier." She placed the pendant in his hand. "Maybe it's not supposed to be strength anymore," she said softly. "Maybe it's memory. And memory can't be carried forever. It has to be shared." He looked at her quietly for a long moment. Then he whispered, "There's something I never told you." Sandra waited. He sat down on the couch, his hands trembling slightly. "The day Maya passed," he began, "I wasn't there. I was filming. I told her I'd visit later that night. She sent me one last voice message before it happened. I never listened to it. I couldn't." His voice cracked at the end, the words trembling into silence. Sandra knelt beside him. "You still have it?" He nodded slowly. "Then maybe it's time," she said gently. "Maybe that's what's been holding your voice back. All the words you never let yourself hear." He stared at his phone for a long time, his thumb hovering over the old message. Then, with a deep breath, he pressed play. A soft voice filled the room. It was young, calm, full of love. "Hey, brother. I know you're working, and I'm proud of you. Don't worry about me. When you can't speak, just remember, kindness is your voice. It always was. So don't let silence win, okay? I love you." The recording ended. Keanu sat still, his face wet with tears, his breathing uneven. Sandra said nothing. She just held his hand. After a long silence, he whispered, "That was the last thing she ever said." "And the first thing you needed to hear?" Sandra replied softly. He closed his eyes, tears still falling. "I've been afraid to let go," he said slowly. "But maybe letting go doesn't mean forgetting. Maybe it just means forgiving myself." She squeezed his hand. That's what she wanted. He looked at her with eyes full of something deep, something raw and grateful. "And maybe that's what you wanted too," he whispered. "What I wanted," she said gently, "was for you to find peace. Not for me. For yourself." They sat like that for a long time. Two souls, quiet but connected, letting the sound of truth replace years of silence. Later that night, he walked her to her car. The wind was soft, carrying the faint smell of rain. She turned to him and smiled. "You know," she said, "you don't have to thank me anymore." He shook his head lightly, his voice steadier now. "I wasn't going to." "No?" She smiled. He looked at her, eyes glimmering with warmth. "I was going to say, don't go." The words hung between them, soft but powerful. She looked at him, her breath catching. "I'm not going anywhere," she said finally. "Not this time." For the first time in months, he laughed, a small, real laugh. It was quiet, but it felt like music. As she drove away that night, Sandra glanced in her mirror and saw him still standing there, hands in his pockets, looking up at the stars. His silence was gone now, replaced by something stronger: acceptance. But she didn't know that Keanu had one last thing left to do, something that would close his story with Maya and open a new one with her. When silence finally spoke, the next morning felt different. Sunlight spilled through the thin curtains of Keanu's home, painting the room in soft gold. He stood near the piano, holding the small pendant in his hand. The air was still, calm, but inside him, something had shifted. The kind of quiet that doesn't hurt anymore. For the first time in months, silence didn't feel like an enemy. It felt like home. He looked at the photo of Maya on the table. Her smile was gentle, full of the same warmth that had guided him through every storm. He whispered, his voice clear now, "You can rest, Maya. I'll keep speaking. Not with noise, but with kindness. Just like you wanted." Then softly he placed the pendant beside her picture. That day, Sandra came to the set early. She expected him to still be fragile, still recovering. But when he walked in, his posture was steady, his eyes peaceful. The crew turned toward him, shocked, then smiling. Even the director paused mid-sentence. Keanu nodded politely, then looked toward Sandra. Her heart lifted the moment their eyes met. Something inside her knew. This was not the same man she'd met weeks ago. This was someone who had walked through pain and found his way out quietly. "You're early," she said softly. Walking up to him, "So are you," he replied, his voice smooth. Calm, real. She froze for a moment, her eyes widening. Hearing his voice again, full and steady, felt almost unreal. Tears welled up before she could stop them. You're speaking," he smiled. "I had to," he said quietly. There were things left unsaid. She shook her head, smiling through her tears. "You don't owe me words." "I do," he said, "because silence healed me. But you taught me how to use it. Not as escape, but as strength." The director called for a short break before filming. They sat together outside under the soft afternoon sun. Birds moved between the trees, their chirping faint against the hum of the city. Sandra leaned back, breathing deeply. "Do you ever think about what's next?" "Every day," he said, "but not with fear anymore. I think Maya's gone, but she left her peace behind. And maybe that peace was meant to be shared." She smiled. "You sound like her." He nodded. "She'd like you." They both laughed, quiet. Warm laughter that felt like sunlight finding its way into old shadows. After a long pause, Sandra said softly, "You know, you don't have to keep carrying her story alone. People would listen if you shared it." "I will," he said, "but not as a tragedy. I'll tell it as kindness, the kind that speaks when no one else does." A week later, filming wrapped. The movie, one that had started with a broken voice, ended up becoming something far greater. Critics called it the performance of silence. Audiences said it was a story you don't hear, but you feel. Keanu didn't give many interviews, but when one journalist asked him how it felt to lose and regain his voice, he smiled and said simply, "Sometimes you don't lose your voice. You just lend it to silence for a while, so it can teach you something." After the premiere, Sandra found him standing near the stage, away from the crowd. He was watching the audience's reactions, people wiping tears, holding hands, staying silent long after the credits rolled. "They heard you," she said quietly. Stepping beside him, he looked at her, eyes shining softly. "No," he replied, "they heard us," she smiled. "And what did they hear?" He looked toward the crowd again. "That silence isn't empty. It's full of everything we never had the courage to say." They stood together, watching people leave with wet eyes and full hearts. Later that night, they took a quiet drive back to the lake, the same place where he had spoken his first word again. The moon reflected perfectly in the still water. Sandra looked at him. "You know," she whispered, "you could write all this down. The letters, the music, everything. People would understand?" He nodded slowly. "Maybe, but not yet." "Why not?" He smiled gently. "Because some stories aren't meant to be finished right away. Some are meant to keep breathing." She smiled back. "Then let this one breathe." They sat in silence for a while, not the kind that hurt, but the kind that healed. The kind that speaks softly between two souls who don't need to explain anything anymore. Finally, he turned to her and said in a low, calm voice, "Thank you for reading what no one else could hear." She looked at him, her eyes warm and steady. "Thank you for letting me listen." And for the first time since everything began, there was no pain left in the quiet. Only peace, and the sound of two hearts that had learned how to speak without ever raising their voices. As the wind brushed against the lake, Keanu took one deep breath and whispered toward the night sky, "This time, the silence belongs to love."